Hey, everybody. So here we are. It is our final assignment of remote learning and the school year. Thank God. All right. I figured it'd be easiest if I just kind of explain this in a video. If you aren't going to watch the whole video, I figure I probably ought to do this now. I just want to thank everybody for a great year cut short. I had good times in all periods, and I want to thank everybody for making me laugh, laughing at my jokes, even the bad ones, and just everybody reminding me this year of why I just keep coming back year after year and doing this, because I had some good times. I have some great memories. And I wish they hadn't been cut short, but the good news is most of you are juniors. Well, at this point, all of you are juniors because the seniors are cut loose. I'm just glad that I will have next year, in whatever form it may be, but we will have next year to make a few more memories. And I am thankful for that. And I am thankful for you. And so, thank you. All right. With that said, the conclusion of Limits of Power. Now, you will see I attached an email. Essentially what this is I've given you the conclusion, and I have given you two very short answer questions. And what I'm talking about here is like a little more than a paragraph for each one. Use a quote. It's your opinion. Essentially, you do this, and you nailed it. All right? Like, give me your opinion on these two questions. Write about a paragraph each. Use a quote from the conclusion to back up what you're saying. And gold. All right? And so the two conclusion questions are this. All right? After reading the author's conclusion to Limits of Power, answer both of the following questions that the author deals with. Be sure to include one or two quotes. One is fine. It's one. We're almost done. Let's be almost done. One quote is fine. All right? To support your opinion in this regard, or to either have that quote support what you're saying, or have that quote to point out a flaw that you think is in that idea, right? So number one, the author suggests that in the ordeal in the ordeal, no, it doesn't. The author suggests that in order to deal with the Islamic terrorist threat, the United States should adopt a containment policy comparable to that of the Soviet Union and communism during the Cold War. Is this a feasible solution? What problems could the U.S. run into in trying a tactic such as this that would not have been the case during containment of communism? I would argue a major issue being that Islamic terrorism really, yes, communism ideologically speaking, but it was an ideology within set bordered nations, whereas I don't know if you could say the same for Islamic terrorism. Keep that in mind. Okay. Then number two, the author also suggests that in this modern era, nuclear weapons are unnecessary, for conventional weapons are just as effective in deterring nations as nuclear ones. I don't know if I can be on board with this, because as we've talked about, nuclear weapons prevent war. I'm kind of surprised he takes this stance, I'll be honest with you, but it's up to you. It's your opinion, right? Do you agree with his ideas on nuclear weapons and that conventional ones are just as effective? All right? And so you're going to answer both those questions. Again, short answer, everybody. Like a paragraph each. Both answers should really not take more than a page, right? Write your name, write your answers, and be done. And then go enjoy not remote learning, right? Like that's the goal here, everybody. Like one page, paragraph each, a quote in each one supporting like what you're saying, and you're good. Okay? So what I would like to do real quick too, I'm not going to read the whole conclusion. I just want to go over some major parts that really where he focuses on that and kind of get into maybe some positions you could take in that regard. So if you look on 171, what he's getting into is this was published right as Obama was getting into the race, and it was going to be the election of 2008, and all that change, and yes we can, and all this type of stuff, right? So if you look on page 171 and you go to the first full paragraph, all right, where it says no doubt the race, okay, he says no doubt the race for the presidency matters. It just doesn't matter nearly as much as the media's obsessive coverage suggests. Whoever moves into the White House on January 20th, 2009, the fundamental problem facing the country, a yawning disparity between what Americans expect and what they are willing or able to pay, will remain stubbornly in place. Any presidential initiatives aimed at alleviating the crisis of profligacy, reforming our political system, or devising a more realistic military policy are likely, at best, to have a marginal effect. Paradoxically, the belief that all or even much will be well if only the right person assumes the reins as president and commander-in-chief serves to underwrite the status quo. Counting on the next president to fix whatever is broken promotes expectations of easy, no-cost cures, permitting ordinary citizens to absolve themselves of responsibility for the nation's predicament. And I think that's an important point that he's making there, because I really think that we think that, like, it's the presidency, right? A bad one means bad times. A good one can fix everything, right? And once we vote, we're done. No, right? Like, there has to be a change in social identity. There has to be a change in social thought. There has to be a change in what we value if things are going to change. That's what he's getting at here. Electing a guy president for 4 years, possibly 8, is not going to solve problems, right? We have to change and solve our problems as a society. And really, I would argue, like, your local reps, right, in the state house of Maine, or whatever state you may live in, we all live in Maine, right? Those elections are the important ones, because those are the ones that have immediate effect on what you do and what you have access to, right? Presidential ones, it takes a long time for presidential policy, as we've discussed, to really affect anything, right? So keep that in mind. All right, and then if you flip to page 176, all right, on 176, the second full paragraph, he says, once we acknowledge that Bush's freedom agenda is unworkable and unsustainable, however, alternative approaches to strategy informed by the Niebuhrian concept of concurrence are not difficult to devise. Consider, for example, the perfectly real, if far from existential threat posed by violent Islamic extremism. By overstating the Islamic danger, water, it's nighttime. Not as refreshing. All right. By overstating the Islamic danger, President Bush has committed the United States to a strategy of open-ended global war that cannot succeed. Although the Bush administration and its supporters want us to believe that alternatives to waging global war do not exist, that is nonsense. One possible alternative to pursue a strategy of containment. Such a strategy has worked before against a far more formidable adversary. It can work again as a framework for erecting effective defenses. The main purpose of containment during the Cold War was to frustrate the Kremlin's efforts to extend Soviet influence. The purpose of containment today should be to prevent the sponsors of radical Islam from extending their influence. The basic orientation of this strategy is defensive, yet its ultimate aim is not to accommodate but to overcome. Cold War containment created a competition that Soviets could not win. Over time, as the communist alternative to liberal democracy lost its appeal, the threat withered and eventually collapsed from within. A new strategy of containment should have a similar goal, allowing the inadequacies of Islamic extremism to manifest themselves and advancing the day when this threat too will wither. Reinventing containment does not mean creating a new NATO or funding a new Marshall Plan. It does mean intensified surveillance of Islamist activity combined with sustained multilateral police efforts to prevent terrorist attacks and to root out terrorist networks. It should also deny Islamists both the sanctuaries and the wherewithal, especially financial, needed to pursue their agenda. What he's getting at there is the idea that eventually the communists are not able to control information like they always have. And so as a result, people in communist regions start seeing that life in the West, not that bad. It's like we've talked about, right? Like, yeah, we can talk about Reagan and the nuclear arms race and the second buildup and Star Wars programs and all that type of stuff and how that does contribute to the downfall of the Soviet Union. But again, make no mistake, Bruce Springsteen, Blue Jeans, and Coca-Cola were just as quick to bring down the Soviet Union as any military buildup ever was. Because people finally realized Coca-Cola is delicious, Bruce Springsteen's music is amazing, all right? And Levi's jeans, comfortable. And I want that stuff, right? And so eventually, Islam will be able to provide a new caliphate, a new Islamic caliphate will not be able to provide a lifestyle that they are saying they can. And if we contain Islam and cut off their money and cut off their ability to grow, people that are under their control will also see the reality of the situation and tilt towards Western civ. That's kind of what he's getting at there. All right. Containment during the Cold War did not preclude selective engagement, nor should it today. A strategy of containment should permit and even underwrite educational, cultural, and intellectual exchanges. It should provide opportunities for selected students from the Islamic world to study in the West, and it ought to include a public diplomacy component. Yet, however worthy, such initiatives will have a marginal effect at best. Our ability to influence perceptions and attitudes across the Islamic world will remain limited. By extension, Americans ought to give up the presumptuous notion that they are called upon to tutor Muslims in matters related to freedom and the proper relationship between politics and religion. The principle of informing policy should be this: let Islam be Islam. In the end, Muslims will have to discover for themselves the shortcomings of political Islam. Much as Russians discovered the defects of Marxism-Leninism and Chinese came to appreciate the flaws of Maoism, perhaps even as we ourselves will one day begin to recognize the snares embedded in American exceptionalism. President Bush's freedom agenda has attracted negligible international support. As a result, when it comes to liberating the Great Middle East, the United States finds itself stuck doing most of the heavy lifting. A strategy that aims to contain violent extremists would likely be far more agreeable to American allies and could be persuaded to shoulder the greater portion of the load. All right, so that kind of like really gets into the whole containment part of that. So then if you go to page... It. If you then go to page, here we go. All right, hold on, there we go, 178. All right, in the first full paragraph, this now gets into the whole nuclear weapons and all that type of stuff, right? First full paragraph where it says for the United States, and he says for the United States, abolishing nuclear weapons ought to prevent. My voice cracked. I couldn't even read prevent. I don't know what's happening. For the United States, abolishing nuclear weapons ought to be urgent national security priority. So too should preserving our planet. These are the meta challenges of our time. Addressing them promises to be the work of decades. Yet, ridding the world of nuclear weapons is likely to prove far more plausible and achievable than ridding the world of evil. Transforming humankind's relationship to the environment, which will affect the way people live their daily lives, can hardly prove more difficult than transforming the greater Middle East, which requires changing the way a billion or more Muslims think. In lieu of President Bush's misguided global war on terror, these two issues offer a concurrence that can provide the basis for sound strategy. In each case, realism rather than idealism, not do-goodism, but self-interest provides the impetus for action. The idea is not to save the world, but to provide for a well-being of American people. The others might credit the United States with promoting common good, thereby refurbishing U.S. claims to global leadership, ranks at best as a secondary, although by no means trivial potential benefit. Nuclear weapons are unusable. Their employment in any conceivable scenario would be a political and moral catastrophe. For the United States, they are becoming unnecessary, even as a deterrent. Certainly, they are unlikely to dissuade the adversaries most likely to employ such weapons against us, the Islamic extremists intent on acquiring their own nuclear capability. And so what he's saying is so if Islam isn't a nation, Islamic terrorism, is an ideological beyond borders thing, if they acquire a nuclear weapon and use it against us, what do we then do? Right? We can't necessarily do the whole idea that one nuclear weapon ruins your day and who do we blow up? And if we blow somebody up, what then happens? World War III, nuclear holocaust, what do we do? That's what he's getting at. If anything, the opposite is true. By retaining a strategic arsenal in readiness, and by insisting without qualification the dropping of atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities in 1995 was justified, which it was. I'm a Truman man, always will be, just throwing that out there. The United States continues tacitly to sustain the view that nuclear weapons play a legitimate role in international politics. This at a time when our own internet interests are being served by doing everything possible to reinforce the existing taboo against their further use. Some would argue their existence makes it so that we don't use it. Anyway, it's a whole big thing, right? We've talked about it. Furthermore, the day is approaching when the United States will be able to deter other nuclear-armed states, like Russia and China, without itself relying on nuclear weapons. Modern conventional weapons possess the potential to provide a more effective foundation for deterrence. They offer highly lethal, accurate, responsive second strike or even first strike capabilities. Precision conventional weapons also carry fewer of the moral complications that make nuclear weapons so inherently problematic. Hence, they have the added advantage of being unusable, which enhances credibility. My problem with this is that if they are usable, we're going to use them. Right? The whole point of why you don't use a nuclear weapon and why it's such a big threat and why you don't end up fighting each other is because you will use them and then the world is over. Which with a conventional weapon, they're not. We just use them. And then we blow up a bunch of people and we're like, well, that worked. Use them again. Right? That's my concern there. Just throwing that out there. All right. By the end of the Cold War, the United States had accumulated a stockpile of some 23,000 nuclear weapons. By 2007, that number stood at an estimated 5,736 warheads of various types. Although the reduction appears impressive, this represents less an achievement than a gesture, like the chronic cigarette smoker who goes from 3 packs a day to 2 and fancies that he has his habit under control. Even if one assumes that nuclear weapons possess any real utility, what conceivable target set would require more than 100 warheads to destroy? Far more severe cuts in the U.S. arsenal, shrinking the total to a couple hundred at most, are in order. Oops, hold on. Sorry. And then if you flip to the very last page, 182. Yep, hold on. Just want to make sure I'm in the right position. Oh, sorry. Then if you flip, all right, to 181, sorry, okay. Second paragraph says a concerted effort, all right. It says a concerted effort to abolish nuclear weapons will entail some risk. A concerted effort to reduce the effects of climate change implies considerable inconvenience and even sacrifice, at least in the near term. Yet a people for whom freedom has been synonymous with consumption and self-actualization evince little appetite for either risk or sacrifice, even if inaction today increases the prospect of greater risks and more painful sacrifices tomorrow. As long as Americans remain in denial, insisting that the power of the United States is without limits, they will remain unlikely to do any of these things. Instead, abetted by their political leaders, they will continue to fancy that some version of global war offers an antidote to Islamic radicalism. The United States will modernize and enhance its nuclear strike capability while professing outrage that others should seek similar capabilities. Americans will treat climate change as a problem to be nickel and dimed. They will guzzle imported oil, binge on imported goods, and indulge in imperial dreams. All the while, Washington will issue high-minded proclamations testifying to the approaching triumph of democracy everywhere and forever. Meanwhile, the American people will ignore the imperative of settling accounts, balancing budgets, curbing consumption, and paying down debt. They will remain passive as politicians fritter away U.S. military might on unnecessary wars. They will permit officials responsible for failed antidote to terror. For failed, moving on to the last page, policies, 182, accountability. They will tolerate stupefying incompetence and dysfunction in their nation's capital, counting on the next president to fix everything that the last one screwed up. In Niebuhr's words, they will cling to a culture which makes living standards the final norm of a good life, and which regards the perfection of technique as the guarantor of every cultural as well as every social moral value. Above all, they will venerate freedom while carefully refraining from assessing its content or measuring its costs. All right, and so, like I said, everybody, answer both questions. It's your opinion. You can't be wrong. Write me a pretty good sized paragraph. Use a quote to support what you were saying, or to use what you're saying against it. All right, and you're done. A page, and that's it. Consider this the assessment for limits of power. All right, answering both. Good solid paragraph for each one. No more than a page should be necessary. Write your name. Start writing. Right? In each paragraph, use one quote from the conclusion, and you are gold. All right? And so with that said, hey, I love you all. Have a good night. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm here all week, everybody. Love you all. See ya.